there is a lot of false narratives, whether you call it fake news or you call it the pablum that we've been given. The whole thing about marketing, art, and science, you key that into Google and you're going to get 600 million searches. Is marketing and art and science, and you'll get people on both sides arguing very aggressively, like, no, marketing is an art and this is what, no, marketing is a science and this is what you need to do. And really, it's the wrong question to ask. So I think those false narratives are true. The 4 P's to the 4 C's. There was a poll that was done by Marketing Week, just a couple of years ago, their product, price, place, and promotion. And those were put in place like 50, 60 years ago. And they asked this Marketing Week poll, are they still relevant today? And 77% of people said yes. And it's like, what are you thinking? It's not about you. It's not inside out. It's about the customer in.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Doing creative work can be kind of lonely, and that's why we built the Unmistakable Listener Tribe. The tribe is a community for professionals to connect and support each other. Everything is designed to help you grow your business and share what's working and what isn't. And that's true whether you're a business owner or an artist. You'll get access to feedback, live conversations with guests, and so much more. By joining the tribe, you become part of a community of creators who all support each other, and it's completely free. Hopefully I'll see you there. Visit unmistakablecreative.com/tribe to join. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/tribe. Engelina, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
I am delighted to be here with you this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I came across your work by way of somebody on your team who apparently had been a longtime listener of our show. And when I found out about the way that you wrote about marketing and the fact that you did it sort of in mental models and frameworks, I think that was very appealing to me because I tend to geek out on things like that. But before we get into all that, I want to start by asking, what did your parents do for work? And how did that end up shaping and influencing the choices that you've made with your own life and career?
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question. What my parents did for work probably was not as significant as what the journey that they followed. And I'll explain that what I did for work, I think, really influenced my choices. And we can get into that later. So I'll step back a little bit. We're an immigrant family, as I know so many of your guests and audience members are. And we immigrated. My father was 41. My mother was 35. 3 children. We were born in Holland, in the Netherlands, in Europe. And they set off to find new opportunities in America. Now, this is not going through Ellis Island type immigration. I mean, this is, through a regular ocean liner and things of that nature. So it was past that decade. But they really wanted new opportunities. My father, in the old country, as he called it, was a bookkeeper. Private, and an entrepreneur, so to speak, because he had a shingle on the house and he would have clients that he would keep their books for and taxes and things of that nature. And my mother was a homemaker, and neither one of them had been to high school. So don't even think about college. I mean, they neither one had a high school education, but they were very smart and very learned in their own way. Anyway, at 41 and 35, 3 children, they decided to immigrate to the United States. We ended up in the Midwest in Indiana because at that time you needed a sponsor family in order that would take care of you financially in the event, so you wouldn't be a burden on the government, and we never were. And my father, even though he had so-called office work, obviously not knowing a word of English, neither one of them, they started all over again at the bottom. And so my father did a variety of manual work, in factories and janitorial and things like that until he learned the language. And when I was age 8, they became citizens, and I also became a citizen. I carried a green card until that, and I have 2 older brothers. So then he was very proud of himself. He self-taught himself. He took the GRE, the high school equivalency exam, That was a very proud moment for him. And so I say, to your question, how did their work influence me? It was really their life journeys, their life journey and choices that influenced me, I think, Srini, more than, the roles or the work that they
Yeah.
did. I think my father was very brave, very courageous, didn't look back, didn't mind dusting himself off and starting at the bottom, because when people don't know the language, they don't, you're not, you're at a disadvantage. And really, we lived a very modest life, but I think the biggest gift they gave me was stability, a very stable home life. And I know so many people aren't as fortunate. And so it was not one of chaos or torment. It was just very predictable, maybe very maybe very ordinary, but it was very stable. And I think from that stability and that comfort and that love and closeness in the family, I was able to, be confident in my own independence, in my own self-reliance, in my own ability to forge my own path, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So two questions come from that. Outside of adapting to having to learn a new language, both for you and, as children and your parents, what things did you notice about sort of the social structure and culture of America that was very different from being in Holland?
Oh, that's very good. Well, so I was young when we immigrated, so I was only 3, and my brothers were 5 and 8. So I was the youngest. What I noticed, so I spoke. I went right to school and television and things like that, where you learn things from romper room and all that stuff. And so I spoke. We'd speak English at home, and they'd speak Dutch back to us. So what I noticed about the social structure, maybe it was because it was in the Midwest. I don't know, and because now I'm based in California. But there was it was dual response. There were some folks that would, when you don't know the language, people think you're dumb. So there were people that thought my mother and father were stupid, and stupid immigrants type thing. I remember some people, and these aren't racial slurs, so I don't want to feel like I'm a victim. It's nothing of that nature at all. But it was a small town, closed-minded. And they weren't used to foreigners. So I think there was a little bit of stereotype against us. I didn't really feel it. My mother took offense to it. I know my father didn't care. He never looked back. He thought America was wonderful, and he loved the freedom here and the ability to chart your own path. So he never looked back. My mother missed her family, obviously. So that is what I noticed. But then that kind of faded away. We moved from Indiana to upstate New York, and New York was a little bit more integrated and progressive and a little bit more open-minded than the Midwest was. And again, no disrespect to any of your Midwest Western listeners, but so I think that's what I noticed. Probably there's people are afraid of foreigners. But speaking to the other side, there was another group of people. I remember a dear neighbor of ours who took my mother under her wing, and she said, your daughter needs to learn how to play piano. And your daughter needs to read, Little Women. And she'd buy me all these cultural things. And it was really very touching that she was really extended an olive branch and saw it as her mission to help this immigrant family, adapt and thrive in a new world.
Mm-hmm. So for your dad, we're in a situation, obviously, where people are going through a lot of hardship right now. And what I wonder is, for somebody at the age of 41 to say, okay, I'm going to start over from the bottom, that in my mind requires an incredible amount of humility. What do you think it is that enables somebody to have that level of humility to say, okay, you know what, like this means I'm going to have to start at the bottom? Because I think that, when you have to reinvent yourself, inevitably to some degree, you do actually take steps back.
Oh, absolutely. He knew he would be taking steps back. He knew that. But I think and it's like change management, right? The whole paradigm, when the pull of the possible is greater than the pain of the present, you make that leap, right, into the new frontier. So I think it was a lot of humility. He didn't, he used to joke, this is funny. He worked at Eastman Kodak Company. and he used to come home, and he had a great sense of humor. And he'd come home and he'd say, well, I was in the CEO's office again. I go in the CEO's office every day. And we said, wow, that's really, he'd tell friends and relatives and stuff. They'd say, wow, that's really amazing. You're in the CEO's office every day. Oh, yeah. Emptying his trash. And he would laugh. And it was just so true, to who he was. He was just, he didn't care, and he provided very well for us. So no problem there. Never took a handout, but just, yeah, a great sense of humility. Now that can also be a double-edged sword when I inherited a lot of humility, and I found that sometimes works against you in the business world where you're too humble and, let others, kind of, ride roughshod or take credit for things. But that's a whole different story too.
Yeah. So growing up the way you did, with immigrant parents, like what kind of guidance did they give you about career choices or tell you about, how to make your way in the world? I mean, was it like a standard immigrant narrative? Like we didn't come here to have you go waste your life. I think it was, we had this guest recently, Jacob Sager-Weinstein. He said, his narrative was, our parents were peddlers so that we could become doctors and lawyers, and we became doctors and lawyers so our kids could become artists. And I was like, you will never hear an Indian parent say that.
Interesting. No, it wasn't that narrative. So my father was very pro-education. I mean, he was really self-taught. I mean, he was a learner, right? He loved to read. He was a voracious reader. He loved to study history. He loved to read current events. He was very big on current events. He'd know, and he would always say, he'd say to all three of us, he said, I know education's important. Go to school, go to college, get your, but he couldn't really guide us. Like if your father's a doctor, he's going to, or your mother's a doctor, they're going to say, you're going to emulate and say, well, if they did it, I could do it, type thing. Or if you're, what I'm saying, it's kind of where it rubs off a little bit. If you're around people who have made it in a field, you say, well, I can give it a try. If they can do it, I could do it. So it wasn't I didn't get specific guidance. I got a lot of encouragement, especially from my father. My mother just wanted me to be happy and adjusted and, have a well-rounded life. And she was full of love. I mean, she was a wonderful lady, but not as career and education focused as my father. So my father said it's important to go to college. So I did. So I did the pay-as-you-go plan because, it was on my own. So I did 2 years of community college, and I said, wow, that was pretty good. I did that, didn't go in debt. And so then I applied to a 4-year college and transferred. I did that, that went well. And then eventually I got my graduate degree, and that went well. And then that led to my chosen profession. So they were encouraging, but not instructive. They didn't give me the roadmap. They gave me the compass. I think you talk about that in your interviews with Seth Godin and others. You've talked about compass and map. They gave me the compass, but they didn't give me the map.
So that raises another question. Do you have kids? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, we have four children.
Okay. So
millennials, all millennials.
Okay. So numerous questions from this. Like, why is it that you mentioned that your parents were encouraging but not instructive. And I feel like so often parents are insistent on giving their kids a map rather than a compass and being instructive rather than encouraging. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it's maybe more for themselves. I hate to say that. Maybe it's a little selfish if you give a map. Maybe if your children are successful, somehow it elevates you and your social status and your, among your peer group. Maybe I'm being harsh in that statement, but that's the only thing I can think of. Why would you tell someone exactly what to do? Don't you want them to explore and find their own path? And it's a combination of my mother. She wanted me to be fulfilled and happy, and my father said, and I know education is the key, so get some education, very important. But they were more about values, more about instructing on right and wrong than they were on, they didn't give us the map. None of us, received the map. I don't know if it was a cultural thing or individual thing, but I feel very fortunate, I'd prefer that than the map because I think then I would have had expectations placed upon me.
So how has the way that you were raised by your parents informed your own decisions and guidance as a parent?
So I one of the big things is, I like this word, especially for women, to be self-reliant. And it's a little different than being independent. I'm a very independent person. But I think being self-reliant versus being other reliant is a very, very important trait. And that's how I try to raise my children as well. Obviously we're here to support them. We don't want them to, we're a safety net if needed, but
Yeah.
we're not the ones to, write big checks, even though we could at this stage. This doesn't help them in their development. It
Mm-hmm.
helps them more if they struggle a bit, and we're watching. We're gonna, we want to give them, their roots and wings, right? The whole two best gifts you can give your children are roots and wings. And so it's kind of relates to stability and agility in the business world, but roots and wings are very important. So if you give them the right um, um, values and the right foundation, you want them to be deep, but then you also want them to, and I've never asked my children, to go into one profession or the other. My daughter is a creative entrepreneur. She's doing extremely well. And and because of my career has been in marketing and branding, she's asked me repeatedly for help in, how do I brand myself? How do I market this? And quite frankly, I can't help I can't help her very much because her situation's so much different than it is in the business world than my experiences have been. But I encouraged her, even though it wasn't very lucrative for many, many years, to follow that path because I knew that would make her happy. And I could see she was happier doing those things that she was pursuing than she would be if I say, gotta, get a job at Google, which she did. She had a job at Google for a year and was miserable. And I thought, okay, this is a dream job for most millennials, to get into Google and to work on the AdWords team. And she hated it. I said, who hates Google? How can you hate working at Google? But my husband and I were very supportive and said, she's got to follow her path, even though it's not lucrative initially. And we're not going to fund it. She's going to have to struggle. But again, we're a safety net. We're not going to let them sink, obviously. They're drowned. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit of a tough love, but I think in the end, it's the right thing to build character and independence and self-reliance. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to do a deeper dive into this idea of self-reliance and independence, and safety nets, given the context of sort of what we're dealing with today in America, because I don't think that people generally want handouts from the government, but there are a lot of people who are suffering. And I don't think it's because they don't want to be self-reliant. I think that, this is something I probably beat like a dead horse on the show, is that I feel to some degree that there's been a level of self-interest, particularly, when you get into sort of corporations and really wealthy people, that we've pushed to the point of diminishing returns, which doesn't take into account sort of interdependency and the fact that, everybody is dependent on each other, and you can't sort of optimize one group while the rest suffers and not have, long-term consequences. So, when you think about it from that context, particularly given that, I assume, your kids are kind of raised in an upper middle class environment, kind of like I was. But what about the people who don't have a situation that facilitates self-reliance? I mean, who really are, granted, you can find sort of counter narratives to that, like 50 Cent, who was raised in the worst environment possible. But how many people develop that kind of resilience? I think it's really dangerous to use outliers as role models.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the world's changed. I think before it was simpler times. So if you were, living modestly, you could survive and still maintain and care for your family. I think it was different. Now I do think because of the big dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots, there's help needed. There's so many problems going on now. So it's mental health. There's so many, opioid, addictions. There's so many struggles that people have, but just get to the basic people who are falling through the safety net. I agree with you. I think they need help. And I'm okay with giving help. I've never been, it's kind of funny because my father wanted to get out of Europe because the socialism, and not that he was a capitalist, but, he didn't like, handcuffs. And, I'm leaning, not socialist, but it's like, it's okay. Some people are going to cheat the system and get food stamps when they don't need it. And it's okay because, the majority of people probably do. And if you can help someone and if they raise my taxes, I'm okay with that, because life's been good to me. And so sharing it a little bit is okay with me. So I'm probably not the typical capitalist, but I'm not a socialist either. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's do this. Let's shift gears. I think this is actually a perfect place to segue into the whole idea of marketing flexology. But I think, what actually struck me most is, the book is sitting here on my desk, is the subtitle of, how to outsmart change and future-proof your career. Now, the whole idea of future-proofing really struck me because I went to Berkeley as an undergrad at a time when we were pretty much inventing the internet, like the early mid 90s to early 2000, when we were building the infrastructure for everything we have today. eBay went public at that time. Yahoo went public at the time. But one thing I remember that I never forgot is somebody said that, the average computer scientist graduate, by the time they finish a 4-year degree, everything they've learned is already outdated. And that seems to be more and more true today. So
absolutely. What
prompted your desire to frame a book about marketing in this context?
Yeah, no, that's a very good, because I do think that, there's a whole bunch of sub themes here, but I like your point because about the skills you're learning today. And that's why I get away from the art and science of marketing into this thing I call insight and agility, because I think agility, which is going to help you outsmart change and future proof your career. They say that ability can take you so far, only so far, but then agility is going to take you further. But to your point, experts have said that, by like 2034, 47% of today's jobs will be automated. 65% of today's students are applying for jobs that don't yet exist. So that's really, so the prowess or the education, the expertise that landed you your current role is going to be outdated by the time you're looking for your next role. So that's why I am very much into lifelong learning, and to be a lifelong learner, which is different than education. You talk about this a lot. So I'm on, the same wavelength as you are, Srini, as far as, education does not equal learning. Lifelong learning. And with the internet, it's so easily, readily available now. There's no excuse, is the future, and agility is the future. So it's not only the ability to, to be prepared, so that when opportunity meets preparedness, some people say that's luck, but opportunity meets preparedness. If you're not able to execute on that, to seize that moment, to implement, to take action, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's where agility, I'm really big on, the agility and honing your skills, your agility skills or your soft skills. There's more than, and it's not just agility, it's creativity falls in there. But that's where, so in the book, I really talk about half of its mindset and half of its tool set. So I give them the tool set, the compass, or I give them the mindset, the compass, and I give them the tool set because I know people want it. So I give them the map, but the missing link is the action. Will they take the action, to implement it, right? Like anything else.
So let's actually get into this, because like I told you, there was just so much here that I couldn't actually put it into notes, but instead decided to mind map the book. But I think there were certain things that struck me. In the first chapter, you talk about 5 different shifts. And as I said, I think I want to take a look at this through the lens of sort of, a creative entrepreneur, somebody like me who's not necessarily building the next Fortune 1000 company, but, building a small business or a business that, allows them to make a living. And I think there was one thing that struck me in particular was sort of rethinking the sort of traditional model of business school of, the 4 Ps of marketing. And, instead you have the 4 Cs. But let's talk about this whole shift idea in context of creative work and how it applies.
Okay. So there is a lot of false narratives in everywhere, right? A lot of false narratives, whether you call it fake news or you call it the pablum that we've been given. The whole thing about marketing, art, and science, you key that into Google and you're going to get 600 million searches. Is marketing an art and science? And you'll get people on both sides arguing very aggressively, like, no, marketing is an art and this is what, no, marketing's a science and this is what you need to do. And really, it's the wrong question to ask. So I think those false narratives are true. The 4 Ps to the 4 Cs. There was a poll that was done by Marketing Week, just a couple of years ago, and it said, is the 4 Ps of marketing. And for those of non-marketers on the call, their product, price, place, and promotion. And those were put in place like 50, 60 years ago. and they asked this Marketing Week poll, are they still relevant today? And 77% of people said yes. And it's like, what are you thinking? It's not about you. It's not inside out. It's about the customer in. And there was a model that was put in place in 1990, but it was from a non-academic. So I think that's why it wasn't readily adopted. The 4 P's of marketing was through academia, and they do wield a lot of power and authority and peer reviews and all that. But there was a gentleman named Robert Lauderborn. He was from GE, an international paper. He was an executive. And he put forth this model of 4 P's, 4 C's of marketing. He said, it's not about the product. It's about the customer. It's about what the customer needs, wants, and desires. It's not about price. It's, what's the cost to satisfy that need, of want, desires, and needs, and what are those value judgments and trade-offs? It's not just about monetary. It's about prestige, and it's about convenience and comfort, and all those environmental contribution, purpose, And he said, it's not about place where you sell your product. It's about the convenience to buy. And if you want to buy it, online, you're seeing it now, bricks and mortar, online. Amazon's taken advantage of that and doing very well. And he said, it's not about promotion. It's about communication. So he turned the whole, paradigm upside down. He came out with that model in 1990. You have to search to find it. But I've always, in my marketing career and with the teams I've led, I've always espoused that because it's about the customer. It's the customer in. It's not about product, and it's not about the company out. And so people haven't made that paradigm shift. So that's just one of the major shifts that, and branding is another one. People think they own their brand and they can, you don't own the brand. Your consumer owns the brand. They'll tell you what it means to them. You're not going to tell them what it means. You can help manage and guide it, but you don't own your brand.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So these are some of the big shifts. So I like to just I'm not contrarian, but I like to say, why are we, there's a relook. I think we need a relook instead of being fed the same pablum.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have no problem with contrarians. I like contrarian viewpoints. Most of mine are, and most of the people I interview tend to bring those. I do think that the idea of brand is really interesting because I remember Tom Brady was on Oprah's podcast and she was referencing some little kid who was like, oh, I'm building my brand. And she's like, honey, you don't have a brand. Your brand comes from the work that you do.
Interesting.
And that I feel is so misunderstood by so many young people who are like trying to basically get attention.
Exactly. Or they think that, it's, brand is, what you say is what you do. Say equals do. That's the main thing of branding, it's what you do. And that's where you say the work or how you, it's got to be culture. It's got to be all tenets of the organization all the way, all the decisions you make from, how you go to market. It's not just marketing. It's not just the communications. It's everything. It's the decisions you make, the strategies, the markets you pursue, the customers you go after. That's, that really determines say equals do. So as a branding person, I do rebrand a lot of companies and have in my career, that's the big thing I say. Is this true? Is there obstacles in the company that would not allow you to do this? Because otherwise it's fluff and people are going to see right through it, especially in today's day and age. If it's not authentic, it's not real, they'll see right through it and they'll call you out. So it's got to be true to who you are. So a lot of it's, changing the traits and the culture of the company and the processes. If you say you're customer centric, but you can't, answer a question on the front line without going up to management or headquarters, well, then you're not customer centric, so that's a process.
I like a bed that's really firm.
I need something a little softer than that.
Rest easy. With the Sleep Number 360 smart bed, you can both adjust your comfort with your Sleep Number setting.
Can it really help me fall asleep faster?
Yes, by gently warming your feet.
Okay, but can it help keep us asleep?
It senses your movements and automatically adjusts to keep you effortlessly comfortable. Sleep Number, proven quality sleep is life-changing sleep. Don't miss our President's Day weekend special. Save 50% on the Sleep Number 360 limited edition smart bed. Plus special financing and free premium delivery when you add a base. Ends Monday. Special financing subject to credit approval. Minimum monthly payments required. See store for details.
It's not just what you sell that moves the bottom line, it's also how you upgrade the customer experience. And in a crowded marketplace where customers can go wherever they wish with the tap of a button, you need every edge you can get. Introducing Citizens Pay. It's a buy now, pay later solution that lets your shoppers get the upgrades they want right away by paying for them in smaller pieces over time. I recently used Citizens Pay to get a new top-of-the-line ergonomically designed home office chair, and I do my research, and I loved the fact that I didn't have to settle for less than the best reviewed chair on the market. I could still fit it into my monthly budget by spreading out the cost over a number of months. And when customers like me get the things they want, so does your business. More purchasing power with your business today means more customer loyalty in the long run. So while your customers enjoy their new 64-inch zillion pixel TVs, state-of-the-art exercise equipment, and 6-burner stoves to fry, saute, and steam with perfection, you'll be enjoying a nice little boost to your bottom line. Citizens Pay. Get the power to upgrade how you do business. So last year was kind of a disaster for most of us, to put it lightly. But if there's one gift that the pandemic gave us, it was the time to express our creativity and bring our ideas to life. And no matter what 2021 holds in store, you can spend your time creating something meaningful with one of Skillshare's online classes. They have classes on illustration, graphic design, photography, writing, and so much more. If you're interested in learning a skill, Skillshare probably has a class for it. Former Unmistakable Creative guest Andy Pizza has a course titled Find Your Style, where you can discover your creative DNA and bring that thing that makes you unmistakable to your work. And Skillshare is also super affordable, especially when you compare it to some pricey in-person classes. So without breaking the bank, you can explore the things that interest you most for less than $10 a month. Explore your creativity at Skillshare.com/create and get a free trial of their premium membership. Again, that's Skillshare.com/create.
Well, let's do this. I want to go through one more idea around some of the earlier stuff and then get into the frameworks of mindset and foundation and dials. But let's talk about this call to action idea, because I think that's very relevant even for creative people. Like, you go to somebody's website so often nowadays, you like read their about page or you read something. I'm like, I have no idea what you do. These are the people that I often turn down as guests for the podcast. So I'm like, I'm not really clear on what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as marketing professionals, we're big on the call to action. And one of the things, call to action, CTA, is they should be simple. They should be action oriented, time bound. There's certain words that trigger a call to action. That's why a lot of people do sales, because that's like a trigger. So you need a trigger for a call to action. And some of the rules for call to actions are also, I lost my train of thought there, but call to action has to be immediate and it has to be single. Oh, that's what I was going to say. You can't have multiple. That's probably what you see, Srini, when you go on others' websites. They have multiple calls to action. Download this and do this and sign up for this and do that. And it's supposed to be singular in purpose. So focus is a very big thing. Positioning is the art of sacrifice. I think Al Reese said that. A marketing pioneer. Positioning is the art of sacrifice. And that's the hardest thing for companies to do, is leave things on the table. So they want to be all things to all people. And as a result, they're nothing to anyone, so you have to really focus. So, and what I say in the book is I talk about, we need to develop our own call to action. We're so good at it. And again, I'm doing it from a marketing lens because I wanted to stay in my lane, rather than talk more broadly. And, we're so good at developing call to actions for our marketing material, but we're very bad at developing call to actions for our own personal life. So what is it that you need to do to get off the dime, to take that next step, to take that plunge, So I kind of playfully say, if you need a call to action, here's some of my favorite ones, transform or be transformed, flex or die, it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's like, if you need a sense of urgency to take that next leap. And, as I said earlier, if the pain of where you are is greater than the opportunity ahead of you, a lot of people won't change unless they're forced to. And it's too bad, it's too bad because, it's human nature, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, we did a survey of our audience, our readers recently, and the number one thing that came up over and over again was a lack of focus. So I actually sent an email about the opportunity cost of distraction. I said, reply to this and tell me what this is costing you in your life. And I was amazed, but I started the email by saying you shouldn't have opened this email. That was the first sentence. So a lot of people didn't reply. And in one way, I was kind of like, okay, I'm torn that they didn't reply. And at the same time, I wonder if they immediately got the lesson because they didn't reply.
That's good. I like that. I like that a lot. And so what did the survey, what did your findings find?
I think really a lack of focus was a big one, right? The inability to pay attention, all this standard digital distraction stuff that seems to be a big obstacle for most people. And, it's funny because there's almost a sort of conflict because they say they want to do things like write books, build companies, all this stuff. And it's like, but you can't focus enough to get something done. There's no way you're going to get those things done because those things require an immense amount of focus.
Exactly. No, it's true. Positioning is the art of sacrifice. So focus. I mean, that's the number one. Yeah. And then once you knock that one out, go to the next. It's hard. You want to focus is a hard thing.
Yeah. Well, let's get into what you call the marketing flexology mindset. You kind of break this down into three key areas. One is business first. The second is mindset that spans generations and characteristics of a business leader. I want to start with mindset that spans generations because I think this is very uncommon today. Like people often want something, to basically be this massive success within a short amount of time of starting it. And I never forget this one thing. Sam Altman, who was the president of Y Combinator, when he coaches founders, he always says, he's like, your greatest competitive advantage is a long-term view, which he defines as 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's so uncommon nowadays for people. So tell me, when you see that, what do you like when you think about this idea of mindset that spans generations? What does it mean to you?
Yeah. So I did that because I wanted the book to span mindsets because, I've been in marketing for, 3-4 decades. So it's easy for millennials, my own children, probably to say, oops, sorry about that. I got to turn my volume off on this, my notifications. It's easy for them to say, oh, that might have worked but marketing is different today, or the world has changed today, or it's irrelevant. So how do you stay relevant? And I do think some of this mindset about business first or customer first mindset in particular, it is an important one that does span generations. So that's why I mention it because, the characters might change, but I think the basics like focus, positioning, some of the things we talked about, a call to action, the examples will change, but the people saying it will change. And that's why it's so good to hear the same story out of different people's mouth. You hear, I hate to say it, but, you hear some speakers and you'll say, because Tony Robbins, for instance, you'll say, wait a second, Zig Ziglar used to say that, but now he's saying that. And I say, it sounds a little bit like he's just repeating things that have been out there, but it's okay because people don't know who Zig Ziglar is and Tony Robbins, you know what I'm saying? And then even from Tony Robbins, now it's Simon Sinek because even Tony's getting up there in age, right? And so you need the new generation of people to be articulating some of these stories and these lessons and these tried and true, but add new relevance to it, add new meaning to it, and put in a different context. But the story and the foundation stays the same, So that's what I mean, that some of this spans generations. And I do like your quote about the 50 or the 4 year. What did you say? 50 years?
10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Oh, sorry, 10 years. Yeah, and someone else said, I don't know if it was Bill Gates, but they said it only took me 7 years to be an overnight success, or something of that nature.
Yeah,
I know Bill Gates likes to think of things, and he said, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they underestimate what they can do in 5 years. And I think that's very, very true. You look at 1 year views, and that's just a calendar, right? The next page of the calendar. And you overestimate. You say, oh, I thought I'd get that book written. I thought I'd do 20 blog posts. I thought I'd do, this many, this, that, the next, I think, all this. And then you're disappointed because you didn't do it. But they underestimate what that 5 year view is. So having a longer strategic view, definitely, with milestones along the way, but it requires some discipline,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I think the other thing I really appreciated was the way you described the business first mindset is, typically people are like career, team, then company, but you kind of reversed it. Instead, you put the company first, the team second, and your career last. And I think you got to wonder, why is it more leaders aren't that selfless about the way they build their businesses?
I think it's self-preservation. I think, and I did a lot of, to your point, I did a lot of transformations over my career, and I call them career winners and career losers, which gets to the subtitle of the book, Outsmarting Change, Future-Proof Your Career. And I did find, there were hundreds of marketing leaders at companies I worked with, and I saw how they managed their teams, their budgets, their programs, their agencies, and how they mismanaged, I should say. So a lot of the chaos and anguish, really, a lot of it's self-inflicted. And so what I found the biggest difference was the ones that came out of these transformations, these upheavals, as winners, so to speak, shared this business first mindset. So I did find that those who place their companies or their customers first before their teams and before themselves emerged from these transformations relatively unscathed, and sometimes they were promoted. But the ones that were me first, I think Korn Ferry calls it metership. Metership. I like that. Instead of leadership, it's metership. And me first leaders who put their own career and team ahead of their companies, they suffered the biggest upsets. They lost their jobs, they lost their standing, they lost their teams. I think maybe it's ego, self-preservation. We're seeing some of that now play out on the global political stage. Self-preservation versus doing what's right for people you're serving.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny because I think about that in the context of how we even select podcast guests. And I'm like, I will always prioritize the interest of my listeners over publicity for a podcast guest. Like that
Beautiful.
is, without a doubt, the one thing. And we've turned down many famous and well-known people because of that. We're like, our show is not to give you publicity. It's to provide value to our listeners.
Totally agree. 100% agree. And if you do that, the rest will take care of itself. And that's what I found. Whenever as leaders in business, you're always faced with decisions. And it's very easy to say, oh my God, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my team? Are they going to take half my budget away? Oh my gosh, I better vote against this or do something. But if you say, what's the right thing for this? I like to say, you can't have a solvent career without a solvent company or solvent business, And if your company isn't succeeding, how do you think you're going to succeed if the company's not succeeding? So to me, and when I say business first, it is business first. And if you put it in that order, what's the impact on the business? The right decision for the business, which is really the customer, right? Is it the right decision for my team? Is it going to help them, enable them, move them in the right direction? And is it the right thing for me? You put yourself last, you can never go wrong. And maybe that's some of the humility part too. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about the foundation. You talk about 3 core areas, which are purpose, people strategies, and core processes. Let's talk briefly about purpose, because I think that, this sort of search for, what's my why can also become an act of mental masturbation for a lot of people who just end up doing nothing in search for their why. I'm always wary of that because I feel like whatever that purpose is something you discover. I was really fortunate that I got to literally have Simon Sinek dissect it for me when he was a guest on the podcast. And I remember when he told me, he said, your why is that you're obsessed with people who are good at unusual things. And my immediate response was, that's fucking useless, Simon. What do you want me to do with that? And now, 10 years later, I'm like, wow, that was spot on. Every single thing I've done is a reflection of that exact statement.
Wow. Well, I'd love to talk to him. I'd like him to tell me what my why is. That's good. So now it's night and weekend reflection on myself, right? So that's awesome.
Well, let's talk about that.
Awesome.
Like, it's, the thing is that reflection itself can be almost counterproductive if you're not careful. So like, how do you help people find this, within organizations? And then how do you take that and, extrapolate it to individuals?
Yeah. So I think it's easier when you do it with companies or brands than it is with individuals, because it gets personal, right? And so when I talk about purpose, of a company, it's a lot less questionable or confrontational. And that's really having a well-defined charter and agreed to support model. So what's the purpose? And again, I set that up in the context of marketing, because that's kind of my bailiwick, where I feel like I have some right to talk about, or some credibility to talk in that field, because that's what my experience has been, and not in the more broad field. So when I say, what's the purpose of your marketing organization? I talk about having a charter, agreed to support model, because just because you were named the CMO, which is Chief Marketing Officer, or doesn't mean that gives you permission to start. It doesn't give you an automatic pass. And so many people think CMOs say, well, I'm the CMO. I've been appointed the CMO. No, that's just a starting block. That is just saying, let's see what you can do. And so the first thing in living up to that, or owning that, or being given credibility in that role, and that's why so many CMOs fail, their tenures are incredibly short, half of what CFOs and CEOs are, but, and there's a reason for that. But, having a well-defined charter and agreed to support model, not just what you think your model is, but have others agree that, yeah, I'm a service bureau, a marketing service bureau. I'm an in-house agency that can deliver this stuff to you, to this company at lower cost. Or I'm an advisor to the C-suite, or, making sure that it's very clear and that everybody signs off on that's what your charter is, or that's what your purpose is. So how does that translate to individuals? I think the individuals, the marketing professionals, benefit from that because you've cleared one hurdle for them. You've been very clear and consistent about what they are and what they aren't, and what they do and what they don't do. So when people
Mm,
throw things over the fence and say, I need 3 images and 2 brochures and a blog post, that's an ask. And that's not strategic. And if you've laid out your charter and support model, say, no, we really need to, why? Start with why. What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you need these things? And is there a better way of accomplishing that? So I think
yeah.
having that purpose, you're enabling your team to operate and to succeed.
Well, speaking of team, let's talk briefly about team. I want to. We're probably gonna have to skip some of what I want to get to in the interest of time. But you talk about people strategies, and I think the thing that struck me here was that you said design first, staff second, and I think that was one of those things. Victor Chang has this book called Extreme Revenue Growth, which I refer back to constantly, and one of the things he always says, he says, don't write a job description, write a results description, which that stayed with me, but. When you think about sort of that, and also, bringing the right people on, because I've worked with a lot of the wrong people, and early on in a small business, the wrong people are serious dead weight, and they don't just slow you down. They can be detrimental to the entire success of the business.
I 100% agree with you. I don't know what percent actually follow that, but you should always design the organization for what you're trying to accomplish. What are the metrics? And then staff it with the best and brightest people. So many people go the other way around. They get you've seen it, a new organization, a new leader comes in, all the old ones are out, and all the new cronies from his old company, her old company, come in, and you say, that's interesting. They bring the posse in, so to speak. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. And it's discipline, right? It's being very business first, doing what's right for the company. So I'm very big on, well-defined people strategy, designing first, staff second. And my second strategy is staff for the valley, not for the peaks. Those are my people strategies that I like to do, because so many times, marketers and business people and all of us, are an optimistic a lot, and we think we need more resources and more people than we probably do. And so we say, oh, I need 10 people to, and then when bad times come rolling, or a recession or economic downturn, you're faced with layoffs. So you should staff for the valleys and not for the peaks, and then supplement it with outside people. So lean and nimble is the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't want to go into the 6 core processes, only because I think it might not be completely relevant to our listeners, but I do want to talk about process, because this is something I hammer creative people with over and over again. I am like, trust me, I am like systems and process. I'm like, you want to know what makes the most prolific artist prolific? Systems and process. So, when you look at it, and I think that, and I remember I'm writing this blog post about the things I would have done differently if I started my business today. And I explained it. I said, listen, I'm like, there's a reason big companies have all these processes that seem like a bunch of bureaucratic bullshit. I'm like, it's because you cannot scale anything without those processes. Otherwise, it basically evolves into chaos. And, from your point of view, based on what I've said to you about sort of creative work, how would you explain this to people who need to understand this from the creative work perspective?
No, that's an excellent point. And a lot of people hate process. They think process is slow, limiting, and bureaucratic, and it's going to slow down their creative. But I found time and time again. Now, I believe in lightweight processes, and not too many. Start with a handful. I'm not saying, processes that overlap each other and they, red tape and gridlock. But I'm talking about systems and processes that enable you to do your best work. So a good example, even in the home life, I have, and maybe I'm rigid on this, but I never have to look for my scissors, for my roll of tape, for the masking tape. I never have to look for my toolbox. It is always in the same place. And I like that. And that's not rigid. I don't like chaos. I don't want to be searching the house for where my car keys are. Can you imagine Where are my car keys? Where did I leave them? Where were you last? Are they in your pocket? No. As soon as I come home, I put them in the exact same spot. And as soon as I leave, I take them out. To me, that's
Yeah.
a system and a process. I don't think that's bad. I think it's liberating, quite frankly. And it saves me so much time, but some people love the chaos. Where did I put that? It's
Yeah.
like, make a system for it, a process. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can evolve that process, but have a little bit of a procedure around, where this stuff is and how to go about it. And in the business world, it's very important. I've been asked to do things
Yeah.
and I'll say, oh, good. We'll call our events agency. Oh, we don't have one. It's like, how am I going to pull this off in 2 weeks if we don't have, did nobody think of doing, it's like you've been around 40 years and you never came up with, it's like, come on, where's the data management system? Where's your, it's just bizarre.
It is shocking. I have a friend who has a consultancy called Gap Consulting where he uses Airtable to build these very complex automations for, huge businesses. And the first thing he has them do is go through their process. And he finally realized, he said, half of them don't know it. And he finally said, look, if we're going to help you figure this out, we're going to charge you for it. And so he's like, we'll help you figure out the process, but now we're going to add on a, massive consulting fee. But he said it's amazing, as big as some of these places get, they don't actually have process.
It is amazing. I am shocked. And you can't do your best work. And that's with the stability, agility, the roots, and wings, right? If you don't have the foundation, how can you really, soar with the eagles, right? if you're saying, oh, where's that nest? Where did I leave that egg? Oh my gosh.
So I think I want to wrap by going into two of the tools, the ones that I think are the most relevant for people listening, and that is the messaging framework and the marketing playbook. Let's get into the messaging framework. I think a lot about this as somebody who tells stories for a living. What is the message that we're trying to get across here? What is the message we send every time we choose a guest? With every email we send, with every blog post we publish. It's something I spend a lot of time on. So I'm curious, what does this framework look like?
Yeah, so it's one page. You could have multiple, but the simpler, the better. And it takes a lot of hard work. That's the focus and the positioning to get to one page. It's easy to do a 20-page messaging map. And I do a lot of messaging. I do a lot of messaging for companies. And it's basically taking all their disparate things and organizing it. It's an organization process, right? It's organized. It's where are your keys? It's organizing it in blocks so that you can double click on those blocks at the appropriate time, but telling the bigger story. So everyone loves a great story. And all great stories start with a messaging map or some framework. So I like a very simple one page at a glance. It could be an 11 by 17 page. Some of them have quite a bit of stuff on it. But if you can and that's all executives in a company will pay attention to anyway, is one page. They're not going to suffer through 20 page of a messaging. And so if you can get it very concise on one page and say, these are our differentiators, these are a value proposition, this is what makes us unique, these are the key products we're going to highlight, and do you agree with this or modify? And I don't really care how they modify. I'm just more excited, elated, when they agree on the priorities. And so once you have that message map, then you can build beautiful stories. They say messaging is an orphan, and what do they say? Messaging is an orphan and stories have many fathers. And so that's good. You want one person to own the pen, one person to write this messaging framework or map, whatever you want to call it, with the blocks, and then do the double click of the content behind it. So if you say behind door number 1, if your big message map is diversity and inclusion, double click behind door number 1. There are your hashtags. There is your blog post. These are some titles. And then marketing people or other business leaders can develop rich content. Here are your spokespeople, can develop rich content behind those. But it's fewer messages, more stories is the goal.
Yeah. You're speaking my language. That's literally the way I think about everything. I think right before we hit record, I told you no sound bites, more stories.
Yeah, exactly. But they should all go back to what your core things are that you're focused on, know. And so, speakers do that, or interviews do that. There's a simple one-page message map for speakers, and it's kind of like a cheat sheet. And they say, if asked any question, go back to these 4, try to weave the message back to these 4 topics that you want to talk about and avoid these others and going down rat holes. So
Yeah.
I don't do that because I'm not an interviewer, so to speak, but
Right.
it's a very good discipline to follow when you do messaging.
Yeah. Wow. So the final piece of this I wanted to ask you about was the marketing playbook. Like, I mean, I feel like, when I look at marketing, there's 1,000 things that anybody could be doing at any given time. I feel like, and every day there's like some new hottest app that somebody needs to be on. And I think what I've found over the course of building Unmistakable Creative is how often so many trends are just giant distractions. I still remember this period of time when Google Plus was this thing that everybody needed to be on, and like every social media marketing blog was talking about it. And 6 months later, here we are. I don't think anybody even remembers Google Plus now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how do you figure that out? Like, I mean, because I feel like going far and wide, it just feels like such a scattershot approach as to going deep into one area.
Yeah. It's a very good point. So the marketing world in particular is very inundated with, I've got a great idea. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And so the playbook really helps set up a system. It identifies where you're going. It's a living document. It's not static. So, obviously with pandemics and downturns, you have to modify on the run and adjust it as needed. But it really gives your team and your clients, your business clients within your company, a clear direction of where marketing is going, where the key priorities are, what the key audiences are. And, the message map is in there. The messaging framework is in there. What the key messages are, you're going to articulate it. And it always maps back to business goals and business strategies and how you're going to measure it. So if you say these are the marketing strategies, they shouldn't be, if someone says we're going to do, image campaign, or take over Times Square, you'll say, okay, now starting with why, how does this relate back to some of our strategies? And then is this going to help the business move the needle? Or is this just some clever idea? So it's kind of keeping creativity or cleverness in check. The ad hoc request in check, because everybody's got a great idea. And marketing, there's a big M marketing and a little M marketing. Everybody's a marketer, and they should be. You want people to market for the company, but the role of the central department is, the big M marketing is to put the systems and processes and the playbooks in place and the frameworks to enable and unleash. I'm not about corralling and controlling. I'm about enabling and unleashing. You can't control these messages or these brands, and you want your employees talking about on social media and with their friends and neighbors. You want them articulating, but that requires, some kind of organized process and framework that the marketing department or leader puts in place that says, here's the boundaries and the framework, and go out and articulate. And that's where I think you can get movement, and you can get everyone marching in the same direction on the same page.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. This has been really, really thought-provoking and eye-opening. I think I love, the fact that this is a very practical approach, because even when you were saying that, I was thinking, about something, when I did a 2-week think week where I just took time off to read and write and kind of reflect on the last year. And when I went back and looked, I said, there's only one metric that actually moves the needle in our entire business. And instead of optimizing for a dozen, maybe we should just optimize for this one, which is conversion from website to email subscribers, because we can influence everything else with that one metric, as opposed to all these other sort of random distractions of, let's get more Facebook fans. It's like, well, will that really do anything for us?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you 100%. Focus is great. If you have one metric or a handful, 3 metrics, maybe the rest are, there's a difference between a dashboard and a scoreboard, right? So sure, you need to know if your views on the website are going up, but that's not your metric, so picking that one metric. And so for marketing, I always say there's 3, you want to influence the stock price, because that's through reputation and belief in the company. You want to impact the top line, and you want to minimize the bottom line. And if you just look at those, the rest that's all management cares about. They don't want to wade through, your dashboard, they want to know, the scoreboard, are you making progress on the things that matter to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Fewer is better. Focus is good. Fewer is better.
Awesome. Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your insights and stories with listeners. So I have one final question for you, which I know you've heard me ask. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Yeah, I was waiting for that question because, and I thought about it a lot, actually, because when I think of unmistakable, I think of distinctive, unique, ownable. And I really related it back to branding. There's a branding exercise that we do, and we say, in the marketing circles, it's if you did this brand or this ad, let's say you created an ad, and if you covered the logo, would you know it was that company? So if it was an ad for Disney, without knowing it was Disney putting forth this ad, it should talk about happiness and magical. And then, yes, true to the brand or unmistakable or unique would be Disney. If it was Volvo, it would be an ad all about safety, let's say. And they do 100 things besides, safety. But their key takeaway that sticks in people's mind or is that unmistakable is Volvo. Apple is innovation. Google is search. Even people, if you did something for Warren Buffett, he's the frugal billionaire, so to speak, right? And is it true? Are the messages that you're sending true to who that person is? So it's really a brand. Oprah would be empathy, And so, like I said, in branding, we cover up the logo and say, who would this company be? And if people say, well, that's not our company, well, then you're going down the wrong path of your company. But you can do it for people too. So if you say that's not, true to who I am, and then it gets back to the say equals do. So that's how I would, being distinctive, unique, ownable, those are wonderful, wonderful traits and behaviors.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and wisdom and insights with listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, the book, and everything that you're up to?
Well, thank you. So I have a website, as everyone does these days, www.marketingflexology.com. Flexology is FLEXOLOGY. It's kind of a play on words of mixology, because it's kind of, I have a little jingle in there about marketing flexology. So anyway, www.marketingflexology.com, and then you can find everything you need on that website.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
What's new in podcasting? Here's what we love, courtesy of Acast Recommends.
I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
And I'm Casper ter Kuile.
And we have just launched a brand new podcast, The Real Question.
Vanessa, you and I met in divinity school, which was a rather unexpected place for us to be.
Yeah, neither of us are religious people, but just because we weren't religious didn't mean that we didn't care about life's quote-unquote big questions, right? How to be good, how to live well.
And sometimes jumping into those big questions is kind of overwhelming. So this podcast is all about finding the seemingly little questions in our lives, because those questions actually lead us to something deeper and more interesting. You might say, the real questions.
So listen to The Real Question on the Acast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast recommends.